This is Final Voice TV, your favorite channel on YouTube. We give you nothing but the best. We talk about countries within Africa, countries in South America, North America, Australia, Asia, and anywhere that needs our concern. It's about development. It's about how people live without any challenges. How we can live on this planet as one people in peace. So today, we say, are there pathways for development in Africa? We look at pathways for development in Africa. What you can do now is to join the discussion. Leave your comments in the comment section. Hit the like button. And kindly tell a friend to tell a friend that they should subscribe to this channel so we grow large audience to discuss some of these issues, pertinent issues that borders Africa and the world. Are there pathways for development in Africa? Going for a break. When I return, my guest, Mr. Mitchell Mahachi, discuss with me what we can do as a people of a continent to develop. I'll be back.
Dear viewer, kindly like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell to receive more videos.
So, Final Voice TV, we're back. We look at pathways for development in Africa. We believe countries within Africa can develop, but what should these countries think of or do in order to develop? They may have programs and projects or policies running, but are there pathways that these countries can focus on to get the optimum results? Welcome to the show, Mr. Mitchell Mahachi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Charles.
Yeah, viewers would like to say thank you for always coming on the show and sharing your opinion and your ideas. So we also appreciate that as a television. Pathways for development in Africa. Are there other pathways that countries in Africa can consider and develop? Is it that these countries don't know these pathways, or they know but they have ignored them because they don't know the positive impact these pathways have?
Right, thank you, Mr. Charles. Probably I will start off with the second question. The knowledge of, pathways that can be followed, I'm sure there are great minds within our leadership which actually have thought about pathways that Africa can actually follow. But I think probably it is the consistency at which we are following these pathways. Probably that could be where the challenge actually lies. Because you find that when they actually meet for their meetings, the African Union, they do have pathways, they have probably brilliant ideas on how to move the continent forward. But it's always, for me, I think the consistency at which we continue to hit these things, keep hammering so that you eventually attain your targets. And I was just thinking about it when I was just thinking about this topic of pathways. So the point that I just thought about was, all these thoughts, these plans cannot actually be achieved if we do not look into the peace and security question. I think it was just a moment ago you were speaking about, the coup d'etats that we find in Africa, and we have just one in Burkina Faso. Just barely 4 months, we have another coup. So the issue of peace and stability actually affects probably everything else that we would want to talk about when we talk about pathways. So I think the first pathway is actually to achieve peace and stability. And this can actually be done if, the group of the African Union actually works, in unity to really stop this issue of coups, to stop this issue of conflicts. Because currently, as we stand now, there are actually 14 conflicts in Africa. And of these 14, we look at like globally, there are only 21 conflicts that are really serious, and 14 are in Africa. So this is why I talk about this aspect of us looking into this security peace issue, because then it affects all the pathways that I might want to talk about.
Because we can only develop in peace. I mean, if there's no peace, there's no absolute development.
Yes.
So I do agree with you when it comes to peace and stability in Africa, especially within the sub-region. I mean, the sub-Saharan Africa. That is where many of these wars are.
Yes.
And it's about time we focused on this peace and within these regions and move on or develop these regions.
Yes.
So I do agree with you that Africa first must consider peace and stability.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
So once we achieve this peace, then now we can now start talking about, you know, the concrete steps towards the pathways. And one pathway that I actually think about, because we actually have, you know, the advantage that we have, you know, a variety of landscapes within Africa. We have a lot of wildlife that we actually have, and this is not like something that you have to build up, because it is there already. So one thing that I actually think is a pathway to development in Africa is looking at the tourism and hospitality sector. So when you look at this particular sector on a global scale, you actually notice that it is reported that tourism actually at the moment commands at least 7% of the world's exports are just with tourism. It is even ahead of things like the automotive industry, it's ahead of the food industry. So it is actually quite an important sector. But when you then break it down to come to look at the situation that we have in Africa as a share of the whole world tourism market, so what you find out is that the GDP for Africa coming from tourism is only 7%, and about 100.
And the 7% of the world's GDP is like combining the GDP of Ivory Coast and Kenya.
So it's just not so much. But looking at the potential that we can actually find within this particular sector, because it only contributes about 169 billion of the revenue in Africa. And then if you look at the share of Africa in the world market on tourism, it's only 5%. So we are saying that the other percentage is taken up by places like probably, you know, in Spain, you know, these places in Europe where they have so much, you know, tourists on during the holidays. So then we look at the situation in Africa is not that good, because we mostly rely on international tourists. So I actually think maybe a solution to this is opening up and encouraging the domestic tourism. Probably domestic in the sense of people within the country. We also talk of domestic in the sense of African people even visiting also African destinations, because this is something that has not actually been taken up aboard. We look at the issue of the passports, for instance. If I'm of the opinion that if we had a universal passport that applies within Africa, so you could just take a bus and you are in Kenya, you take a bus, you are in Zambia, you take a bus, without so much hassles at the border, I'm sure that we can actually ramp up our domestic industry so much that it can actually employ a lot of people. Because if you look at this hospitality industry in combination with the tourism, let's take the case of Europe, for instance. So we have people that actually grow grapes. So when you look at grapes, you wouldn't think grapes are actually connected to tourism. But most people who are actually visiting these places in Europe, they want to have a drink. So they drink wine, and this is from those grape farmers. So the grape farmers and the tourism industry, they're actually quite linked. And then the restaurants are also linked to the wine industry. So it's like, you know, this whole intertwined economy. And this is why even when you look at those that were particularly hit by COVID during the COVID pandemic, the tourism sector was really affected. So we come back to Africa. you look at our farmers who should actually be producing their produce for this particular industry. And the good thing about domestic tourism is that you don't need to work on the flavors for the food or anything, because people already have the flavor for the local food. So this is my take, that we actually need to work on this pathway, and this can actually lead to development of many other sectors.
So apart from peace and stability, we should focus on tourism.
Yes, and
the tourism sector or the tourism industry, because it also attracts some kind of high revenue for countries, especially in Europe, America, Australia, and elsewhere. And that is what we do not do as countries within Africa. And so peace and stability, we talk about tourism industry, and you will link some kind of agriculture to, food production and tourism industry. What else do we touch on?
Right, going forward, I'm looking at the aspect of IT.
IT?
Yeah, because I think we are a little bit behind in terms of IT. You look at the internet connectivity amongst our people is really, really low. Most of the people actually stay in the rural areas, as you know. They have no access to the internet. So I actually think that IT is actually something that we really need to look at. We have seen the example of India. They have actually made quite a lot of strides in the area of IT, until they are now exporting, their IT specialists to places like Germany, to places like the US. And if you even look at the CEOs for the top IT companies in the world, Google, you name it, all these organizations actually have the head as an Indian. So this is an area which I actually think that we actually need to go as Africa. So when you look at the aspect of IT, the first part that I actually think that IT could actually help is in the issue of just everyday communication. Remember, we have over 2,000 languages in Africa. And of these 2,000 languages in Africa, I want to make a translation of three. What's the language?
Three.
Yes, I want to make
as it's been spoken in Ghana.
Yes, I want to make a translation from Shona to Twi. It's not possible, because we just don't have this connectivity. However, we find that even other minority languages, for instance, in Finland, it's just a small country, but their languages actually, you can actually then communicate, because it's digitalized. So I actually think that we need to digitalize our languages so that it actually helps communication, because communication and ideas are always intertwined. So if I can manage to communicate with my brother who speaks Twi, right, and he understands what I say in Shona, right, we can actually move in many ways. Even this language, the songs that we actually sing within Africa, sometimes we don't really understand what is going on because we don't understand the language. But if this could actually be done, that we actually do digitalize the language, the song is being sung, the interpretation comes, you'd actually find that we could actually move the music industry, and not just the music industry alone. Almost all sectors of the economy can actually be improved by just communication.
So a major boost in IT will really lead to development of countries within Africa.
Yes.
And that is what they need to focus on as countries. And use the case of India as an example. India from nowhere is somewhere now. What caused that is the IT. So I do agree with you when it comes to the story of India and how they've used IT to get to where they are now.
So this issue of IT actually goes further, because if you look at it, we actually need to use IT more creatively. Just a small section that we have seen the creativity of the IT in Africa, for instance, is that we actually had a number of people without access to banking. But through the issue or the introduction of mobile banking, we actually then have so many people that have come on board, and they can actually use their phones. Even small-scale farmers in the rural areas can make transactions just using the phone. You make your call, and the money it comes into your mobile account, and you know, we've actually managed to go that. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, the highest rate of mobile banking is actually in Africa. So we need more of these innovations with regards to IT, and I'm sure that it can actually spur development within Africa, together with issues to do with the research and development. So all these combined, like we see many companies have actually come up with big data, and they have actually like large databases that they actually store information, and now we talk about the cloud. So if you were to go to, you know, the rural areas and you tell people, you know, that information can be stored in the cloud, and they are looking at the clouds to think this is the particular cloud. But on the whole, we are just talking about, you know, the possibility that IT actually has for Africa. So it is just
like
mind-blowing.
SMS messages that can be sent to farmers.
Yes.
I want you to touch on
exactly. So it's nice that you also mentioned this. In the context of climate change, we are talking about erratic rainfall, we are talking about droughts, all this kind of information through IT also can actually be, they can actually be assisted. So they can actually have, you know, packaged information that is just particular for a farmer, and he can actually get information that relates to his own farm, right? Not generalized information that we get on news, television, the weather report. They just say it will be cloudy throughout with chances of rainfall. Where exactly are the chances of rainfall? So if it is actually packaged for the particular farmer, then it actually helps. So this is actually the advantage or things that we can actually get from IT. And this is why I actually mentioned that IT is actually a pathway for development within Africa.
Yeah. So we're looking at pathways for development in Africa. We want to grow. Which angle do we look at? Where? What should be the scope? Which areas can we think about as countries within Africa? Can we learn from countries within Europe or elsewhere? This is Final Voice TV. We're going for a break. When I return, your usual guest, your favorite guest, Mr. Mitchell Mahachi, tells us more about some pathways needed in Africa. Final Voice TV, we look at pathways for development in Africa. Let's hear you.
Right, moving on with this aspect of pathways. So pathways are really important. You know, they also provide you with milestones that you can actually then come back and look at to see whether you are moving or you're not moving. So one other area that I actually think that we actually need to look into as Africa is the issue of value addition. So we look at value addition, for instance, because we mostly export raw materials. So we look at the minerals, for instance. I was thinking of this mineral, lithium.
Lithium, yeah.
And of late, when you talk about batteries and lithium, the word that comes into mind is Tesla. So because Tesla is the one that is revolutionized this whole aspect of making batteries. And they are coming up with really big factories that they are putting across the world. I know one such institute that they want to put here in Germany. So you look at these facilities, they employ as much as 10,000 people. For instance, the plant they want to put in Germany would employ 10,000 people. Now, the lithium actually then comes from Africa. So if we could actually come up with plans that actually would have value addition of the lithium at source, so we would actually have, imagine these 10,000 jobs would have been created where we actually find the lithium. So it's not just lithium alone. We have other precious metals. We have, for instance, platinum even.
Diamond, gold,
yes.
Copper.
And most of these are actually not processed even within Africa. So I was just thinking of something just now that it just came up. We even have, you know, the trade of diamonds, for instance. But you find that the auction of diamonds is not actually done in Africa where we have the diamonds coming from. So you would think that probably the auction system should also involve Africa at one point. And then apart from polishing, the diamonds should actually be even made into other products here within Africa. And I think I've seen that being done in Namibia. They are still coming up with this framework to really make products from diamonds within Africa, and that is commendable. It is also creating some jobs in that same light.
So it's about how we add some value to our major exports.
Yes.
And through that value addition process, we can actually create jobs for the people back home. Because the person who received these products in their raw form has to process it. And the processing of these raw materials into finished products create jobs for people elsewhere. Classical example is cocoa. That we just bag the beans, send the bags abroad, and you and I know the price of chocolate in Europe or elsewhere in America. You check how much a small chocolate costs, and you check how much a bag of cocoa is being sold. You realize, hey, African countries, countries that produce cocoa in Africa can do more when it comes to value addition. That is a very good example or a pathway that we can consider as a continent. What else do we say?
Well, I was still on this issue of value addition, because I'm thinking of even if you look at the textile industry, for instance, we produce the cotton, and the cotton is exported raw to places like India, places like China, and then they actually employ as much as quite a number of people actually employed in the textile industry within China. And you find that we actually have less people who are employed in the textile industry here within Africa. But the opportunities are just so huge. If we can actually start to make the textile within Africa, we start to make our own clothes here in Africa. So we also need to work on reducing the post-harvest losses. This is actually a big issue that we need to look at when we are talking about value addition. So you are talking about cocoa. Probably the main reason we are quickly exporting it before it gets bad, So
before it turns into, because these beans attract mold or becomes moldy, the buyer, the purchasing clerks and even the buying companies would like to export them to the user or the consumers abroad.
Yes.
Yeah, because the more it stays, the more it turns moldy. And why don't you take it out there for it to be processed?
So if we can actually add value to our crops and our minerals, I believe that could be a pathway that could actually lead to development.
Yeah, so if you're watching us now, what you can do is to join the discussion. We're looking at the pathways for development in Africa. Countries within Africa. In perspective, what can these countries do to develop? Development is the issue here. What are the pathways for countries within Africa to go by?
Right. So the other issue that we could possibly also talk about is the issue of agriculture. You can't divorce Africa and agriculture when you talk about development, because most of the people, we actually have, I think, around 600 million farmers in Africa.
Almost 1/3 of the population.
Because everyone who stays in the rural area is a farmer to some extent.
Farmer.
Yes. So it is a very important sector that we should actually look at. And when we talk about the China removing people from poverty, they actually went into this sector of agriculture, and they really made sure that they support the smallholder farmers. And that is how they actually managed to pull out as much as 600 million people from poverty in 20 years. So I believe also that within Africa, we need to look at these small-scale farmers. And we actually need to be looking at the aspect of the use of, to mechanize our farmers. Because you realize, for example, in my country, I read some statistics that we actually need around 50,000 tractors to make sure that our food production and everything is actually on track. But we only currently have less than 20,000. So that gives you a picture of, what actually needs to be done to get things moving. Fine, we have the sustainable means that people use, the ox and the plow. But you also need to mechanize other aspects of agriculture. And so if agriculture is actually mechanized, we're talking about irrigation, for instance. In the context of climate change, we actually find that we can no longer rely on the rains. And this is what the majority of farmers in Africa use. So we actually need to irrigate our farms. And if we actually move into irrigation, I believe that could actually more than double the production capacity that we currently have. So this aspect of mechanization and technology for post-harvest, technology even for all the plowing, etc. If we can have this technology in place, this can actually be a driver for change.
Yeah, and it appears all the points you raised are inextricably linked. Because you check, you mentioned the hospitality industry, the bars, the hotels, and what have you. They need food and drinks to serve people. So if agriculture booms in countries within Africa,
yes,
then they can also improve their hospitality industry. Because in the end, these hotels and bars need to sell water and drinks and food to tourists. So it also influences tourism.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And for all this to work, there should be peace and stability. There should be peace and stability.
Yes. So.
And with the issues of IT, it's also connected because you mentioned agricultural revolution.
Yes.
And it may surprise you to know that many countries in Africa do not even have a data of farmers.
Yeah, definitely.
All the government cares is who has the cocoa, who has the coffee, who has the orange, who has the pawpaw to sell, or the tobacco. Where are the tobacco farmers? There they go and sell their tobacco. The government does not even know your yearly income, how much you need to even expand your business. Their addresses, their ages are not known. They don't have the data of these farmers in these countries within Africa. Why don't we connect IT to cocoa production or tobacco production, that we know the exact farmers that are into cocoa or tobacco production? Then we can consider something like pension money from government, because government buys this tobacco and export them. Yes, these farmers receive money, but if we have the data of these farmers that produce the major exports within countries in Africa, then government can also consider some policies, like the pension scheme policy for farmers, and many more. So all the points you raised are connected, one way or the other. Thank you for coming on the show. If you're watching us now, you listen to the researcher and columnist and author, if I should put it. And therefore, what you can do is to join the discussion. Just leave your comment in the comment section. Hit the like button. And let's build large audience. How do we do this? Kindly subscribe. Just subscribe and we can get the numbers to discuss many of these issues on our channel, Final Voice TV. This is where we end today's discussion. And we believe that there are pathways that Africa can consider. Let's do them and develop now. Thank you for watching.